IVM.
Welcome to The Origin of Things. Episode 35. Jump! This is a story of 4 men. 2 men who never expected to be more than just simple ordinary men living ordinary lives. And 2 who would turn those 2 men into heroes, creating legacies for them that would live on long after they were gone. We'll start with Mr. Fiegel. Mr. Fiegel was a pleasant man by all accounts. He was born in 1868 in Chester, Illinois, a town he lived in all his life. He was a bartender and he had quite the temper, as is the case with bartenders, and was quick to fisticuffs, as they say in more elite establishments, of which his bar was not. He led a full, loving and rather uneventful life until someone else got involved. The second of our 4 men, a gentleman called Mr. Sager. So that's Fiegel the bartender and now Sager. After Mr. Sager came into the picture, Mr. Fiegel the bartender's life became shockingly eventful, very, very suddenly. Gone were the quiet days of fisticuffing and bartending, and now he lived quite the life. He eventually ended up becoming somewhat of a, shall we say, seafarer. He went on adventures, he adopted a precocious little child, he fell in love with an intrepid young woman who completely confuddled him. And he would spend years trying to win her love and persuade her to leave her then toxic beau behind. And nobody ever quite found out if he ultimately succeeded. We'll get back to these 2, Fiegel the bartender and Sager who would change his life. But now let's check in on the remaining 2 characters in our story. We now meet Shigeru, an artist who had found considerable success in a small eastern town, now trying to make it big in the American market. After his first homegrown project failed to take off in the US, he was in search of something with a more, shall we say, American flavor to appeal to the local buyer. Shigeru was quite taken in by the story of Mr. Fiegel the bartender, him of the adventurous life and nebulous love triangle. It seemed an all-American wholesome story and he thought he could create something with it, something big. He excitedly pitched his idea to his superiors and they were sold. This seemed like it had promise. A piece of art of this sort could revolutionize the American market. But just before Shigeru could execute his masterpiece, he faced a doozy of an issue. A googly, as they would say. They could not acquire rights to Mr. Fiegel's life story. At first, Shigeru and his associates were devastated, but then they found a neat little way around this loophole. Not ideal, not one that could really utilize the legacy Mr. Fiegel had left behind, but it would do. They took Mr. Fiegel's all-round, all-American, all-wholesome story that they were sure would resonate with the American masses and gave it a little tweak. They renamed Mr. Fiegel. They renamed his lady love, they renamed his nemesis, and they launched their piece de resistance, and America ate it up. Don't forget, this was before the internet explosion, far before the internet explosion. So it's not like this artwork became viral on Twitter or got upvoted on Reddit. No, people would go out to have real life experiences, a concept so rare in today's digital age that marketers slap the tag experiential marketing on anything that transpires off the internet and trot off to enter it in the nearest advertising award function that they can find. But enough of me ranting about my past. No. Americans were making an effort to go out and behold Shigeru's art in galleries which they could touch, feel, and be immersed in the story that he was telling. A story that didn't bear Mr. Fiegel, the bartender on whom everything was based on. It didn't bear his name. But, as a young man once said, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Shigeru enjoyed quite an era of fame for close to 2 years. That's extremely generous for modern artists. There's only so much one could milk one piece of art. But this was halted due to an entirely unforeseen reason. People's reluctance to leave their home for anything but the most unique entertainment, as experiences were being brought to them more easily on their computers. The artist was stumped, and then he and his associates came up with an answer. And here, our final character makes his entry, the man that would be the second unexpected hero of this story, a gentleman called Mr. Segal. With me so far, Fiegel the bartender turned adventurer, seafarer, Sager who changed his life, and Shigeru who enjoyed fame based on a modified version of the former story. And now we have Seagal. Born in Seattle to Italian immigrants, Mr. Seagal grew up to establish a small business and lived an uneventful life with his wife. They both worked hard and managed to turn a modest construction business into a very successful firm which handled major construction, real estate development, and even owned multiple properties across the country. In one such property, a warehouse on the outskirts of Seattle, was where Mr. Seagal ran into Shigeru, number 3, in our story, and his associates. He had, innocuously enough, just come to collect some overdue rent, and due to a series of misunderstandings, ended up reprimanding Shigeru's colleague quite harshly. And funnily, that was all it took to turn Mr. Seagal into a very unlikely sort of hero. His name would be immortalized in Shigeru's next piece of art, one that would find itself into most houses, most computers, and let children, and let's face it, adults, across America and the world immerse themselves in it. So let's recap. Our story started with Mr. Figal, Frank Figal, who inspired L.C. Segar, a popular cartoonist from his hometown, to create a globally renowned cartoon based on him, the bartender. A seafarer who constantly fought for the love of a good woman while keeping her away from a brute of a man. America ate up the story, just like they ate up their spinach. You know these 3 better as Popeye, Olive Oil, and Bluto. But our story doesn't end here. These 3 characters were picked up and modified just enough by a certain gentleman called Shigeru Miyamoto, who worked for a small company that you might have heard of called Nintendo, to create a game that would end up taking America by storm. A game known as Donkey Kong, in which a man jumps over obstacles, navigates through dangerous situations, goes high and low to save his lady love from a brute of a giant gorilla. Sounds familiar? Yes, that was Popeye, but sans all these annoying IPR violations, tapping into a market that was eagerly consuming the hero damsel villain trope that Popeye did so well. And then Donkey Kong was reinvented for home gaming systems as home computers became the new arcade game. It had the same main character, still constantly trying to rescue his princess, a character now named after the 4th character in our story, Mr. Seagal, Mario Seagal. See you next week with another Origin of Things story. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us and all our shows on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on social media. We are at IVM Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to reach out to me, that's Chuck_Gopal on Twitter and Chuck of All Trades on Instagram. All links in the show notes of this episode. See you next week.
I hope you enjoyed that show. So it's been a really fun week on the network. Please do definitely check out all the regular shows that you do. But in addition, let me give you a few recommendations. On Agla Station Adulthood, Ritasha and Ayushi talk siblings. Really fun episode. I think you'll enjoy that. Nishad Pai Vaidya is on Cyrus and they discuss cricket and a lot of different things around cricket. I think you'll enjoy that as well. Old friend Parmesh Shahani, he was on Absolutely Right. Definitely do check that out. Tamal Mills was on Edges and Sledges, another episode which I've heard really good things about. I haven't heard it yet. I need to listen to that soon. And guys, Uncle Please Sit, definitely listen to that. They've been killing it. This week they have Abby Phillips, he's a doctor talking about medical misinformation. Last week Paramita Vora was talking about sex education and who needs it. They've been really killing it. Definitely do check that out. And with that, hope to see you again next week.
Namaskar, dear Bandhu. My name is Ashish Vidyarthi. These are truly challenging times, and in these times, we need hope. Do take time to listen to my podcast, Begin the Journey. Available on IVM Podcasts, website, app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Remember, there is hope because there's one life and we are alive.